Thank you for visiting bestbiblecommentaries.com. In this video, I'd like to show you some of the best reviewed commentaries on the book of Genesis. The first one is part of the NICOT series, or the New International Commentary on the Old Testament series, written by Victor P. Hamilton. This commentary consists of two volumes. The first is Genesis 1 through 17, and the second volume covers Genesis 18 through 50, and so it's a little bit of a larger book. Hamilton wrote these commentaries from 1989 to 1995, so if one of the reasons you're using it is to follow the discussions on biblical scholarship, the information's about 30 years old or so. It is considered an evangelical commentary. However, there are certain matters, some regarding authorship, some regarding textual issues, where Hamilton will discuss and explore various perspectives, and occasionally he will side with what might be considered a moderate liberal perspective on certain issues. On the whole, though, it's considered an evangelical commentary, and it's been well reviewed by conservatives. The next one I'll show you is Gordon Wenham's commentary on Genesis from the Word Biblical Commentary series. It also consists of two volumes. The first is Genesis 1 through 15, and the second covers Genesis 16 through 50. This is also considered a evangelical commentary. It's on the whole conservative, but like Hamilton, there are some specific places where, depending on the argument and depending on the issue, Wenham might favor the argument that would be considered the more moderate to liberal take on a certain issues. Like Hamilton, a lot of the issues revolve around authorship, meaning multiple authorship. So Moses, as well as some other authors or editors, contributed to the book of Genesis. That would be an example. Wenham wrote this book around the same time period as Hamilton, 1987 to 1994. So the scholarship that Hamilton and Wenham interact with is relatively similar. There is probably more exegesis in the Wenham volume than in the Hamilton volume. Hamilton volume might have some more theological reflection. So both of these volumes, commentaries in Genesis, have been well reviewed for pastors as far as laying the exegetical groundwork for their preaching and teaching. The next one I'll show you not only helps with preaching and teaching as far as the exegesis is concerned, but it's written more with the pastor in mind. So the emphasis is less on biblical scholarship and more on teaching and applying the text, especially through preaching. So this is also two volumes, Genesis 1 through 11:26, and then volume 2 is Genesis 11:27 through chapter 50, written by Kenneth Matthews, part of the New American Commentary series. I would say that this commentary is less academic than Wenham and Hamilton. It's not necessarily introductory. I think that if a Sunday school teacher or a Bible study leader wanted to use this commentary, they might find that there's more information than would be helpful in those contexts. However, if they're used to reading biblical reference material, this would probably be the better choice than Wenham and Hamilton. Matthews will discuss controversial and debatable matters concerning Genesis, and most often he is siding with the conservative perspectives on those conversations. Matthews wrote those two volumes from 1996 to 2005. The next one I'll show you is John Sailhamer's commentary on Exodus, which is part of the Expositor's Bible Commentary series. This is the original version that I'm showing you, which was published in 1990. This series underwent a revision in the early 2000s, and Sailhamer updated his Genesis commentary at that time, so the newer version has a publication date of 2008. This is also an evangelical commentary. It's a verse-by-verse commentary, so there's quite a bit of depth to it. The design of the series is for pastors. I think Sunday school teachers and Bible study leaders who are used to reading biblical reference material would do okay with this. It's not technical. You don't need to know Hebrew, but if you're interested in the Hebrew and biblical scholarship, there's some conversation on those matters in the footnotes. Longtime seminary professor Alan Ross wrote a book called Creation and Blessing, which was published in 1988. The subtitle is A Guide to the Study and Exposition of Genesis. Alan Ross taught at Dallas Theological Seminary, which is traditionally Baptist and also dispensational. This commentary has been well reviewed for pastors and teachers. The content is subdivided in helpful ways, so if a pastor just wants to read the sections on theological ideas rather than structure and synthesis, or a pastor might read more the theological areas, and maybe a professor or a Hebrew student might be more interested in structure and synthesis. The point is that the subcategories just help the reader to use this as a reference tool and not necessarily read it front to back. There's also an exegetical outline for every passage, which I think can be helpful to preaching and teaching. It's an evangelical conservative commentary. It approaches the text section by section, not necessarily verse by verse, but verses that are critical to narrative or theology. Those Ross will spend time discussing those, of course. John Hartley wrote the Genesis commentary in the New International Biblical Commentary series. One thing that is important to note about this series is that it was rebranded in the early 2000s. It is now called the Understanding the Bible Commentary series. So if you wanted to get this commentary new, you would look for it under that title, and you can find that on my Genesis page on bestbiblecommentaries.com. I have links to the new one. Hartley is a Methodist Arminian. This commentary, as you can see, is more introductory in nature. The size, of course, suggests that, but it's also one of the more affordable ones, and it's probably the most affordable one of the commentaries on Genesis that I've shown so far. The approach is section by section rather than verse by verse, but again, key verses and key words and phrases are highlighted in the discussion. I think pastors especially would find this commentary helpful because Hartley writes in a very accessible way, and he is even quotable in some places. It's so readable and so accessible. So John Hartley, Genesis in the NIBC series, or the now known as the Understanding the Bible Commentary series. John Walton wrote the Genesis commentary in the NIVAC series, or the NIV Application Commentary series. This is one of the most popular commentary series available today. It's accessible by pastors. I think Sunday school teachers and Bible study leaders would do just fine with this commentary as well. Walton is an expert on Genesis and on the Pentateuch. He has several books that he has published on this topic. One of the distinctions of this particular commentary has to do with the series, and that the focus is on application. So while there is discussion on exegetical matters, historical matters, theological matters, certainly there is a focus in the series and in the volume, and in this volume, on the application. John Walton published this book in 2001, and it still reads very fresh. I think pastors would find it just as helpful today as it was when it was published, and it's ideal for preaching. It's one of the best reviewed commentaries in the NIVAC series. The next two Genesis commentaries I'll show you take a theological approach to the book, and they both are on the moderate to liberal end of the spectrum. James McKeen wrote Genesis in the Two Horizons commentary series. It came out in 2008. Like I said, it's theologically oriented. It's a little over 400 pages, but if you're interested in reading Genesis and thinking through social issues and those kind of applications, ecology, feminism, some of those types of topics, this would be a commentary that you would want to consider. It's not verse by verse. It's not section by section. It's I suppose it's more section by section than verse by verse, but they're kind of broader perspectives on different passages. So here's an example of Genesis 25, 1 through 11, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 or 5 paragraphs on those 11 verses. It's not necessarily exegetical. There's not much Hebrew in it. It's not much conversation on biblical scholarship, but there is some theological reflection. The next commentary, although it's older than the Two Horizons version, Two Horizon edition, is actually similar. Walter Brueggemann in the Interpretation Commentary series. This was published in 1982. Again, if you're looking for a Genesis commentary that looks to make application into social issues, both globally and nationally, this commentary could be helpful to you. It offers more of a theological perspective on Genesis, and again with the application being on collective social matters. The next commentary I'll show you is more conservative in nature, and it's more conservative in approach to the book of Genesis. Bruce Walki wrote this commentary in 2001. It's a standalone commentary, meaning it's not part of any series. Ross would also be a standalone commentary. It's not part of any series. This commentary, I would say, is introductory in nature. I think pastors would find it helpful. I think Sunday school teachers and Bible study leaders would do just fine with it as well. It's more of a section-by-section approach, but certain words and phrases are highlighted. So let's find a good example here. This is from Genesis 3:18. Genesis 3:8 through 19 is covered in about 3 or 4 pages, so not a lot of depth, but enough to get the reader started with understanding the passage. The phrase "the cool of the day" is elaborated on. Dust, as in dust from the ground, has a bit of an elaboration. The word "cursed," pains, childbearing, desire, has its own paragraph. So not every word or phrase is discussed in detail. It's more section by section commentary, and then some insight on the key words and phrases. I wanted to show you a commentary that was an exposition in nature, and what I mean by that is that it really reads like printed sermons. That's how I describe exposition commentaries, expository commentaries. In this particular series, the Preaching the Word series, in this edition is by Kant Hughes. This series requires the authors to actually preach through the entire book. They had to have preached through the entire book, verse by verse, passage by passage, and to contribute to this series. And so this is a result. So these sections read like sermons. I'm sure they're edited a little bit, but they basically read like sermons. So Genesis 22, 1 through 19, the title is "The Lord Will Provide." And when you read through this, it reads like a sermon. There is an introduction, there is a conclusion. Sometimes there's 3 points in between, like some might expect. There are different expository commentaries on Genesis. I just wanted to show you an example, and in this particular case, the theological approach to Genesis is Reformed. I also wanted to give an example of a technical commentary on Genesis, and this one is part of the JPS series, the Jerusalem Publication Society series. And one thing that I forget sometimes is that the book opens the opposite way that most of our books in the United States open. So it's reading from, it opens from left to right. So it's the JPS Torah Commentary, Genesis. The author is Nahum Sarna. This is one of the more well-reviewed technical commentaries on the book of Genesis, put out by the Jewish Publication Society. There is actually more. It's called the Torah Commentary Series, JPS Torah Commentary Series, but there is more books of the Bible being covered by this publisher in this format than just the Torah. I think it started out as just the Torah, but it has expanded. So it's quite technical in nature. You do have to get used to flipping the pages a different way than you might be used to. So here's an example. This is from Genesis 6. You have the English on the left side column, the Hebrew on the right-hand column, and then we have notes and commentary underneath. I don't think that this commentary will be helpful to those who don't know Hebrew and those who are sharp in Hebrew and their studies are up to date. I think would maximize this commentary. Would probably be the only ones to maximize this commentary, unless a pastor has a strong academic and background and is very interested in the Hebrew, studying the Hebrew language, even if it doesn't all come across from the pulpit or the lectern. That kind of pastor might find this commentary helpful. I think most probably won't. I think professors, seminary students, Hebrew students who are doing in-depth work in Genesis and the Hebrew language would be the target audience for this commentary. So it's the JPS Torah commentary, book of Genesis. Thank you for watching this video on the best Genesis commentaries. I hope it's been helpful to you, and thank you for visiting bestbiblecommentaries.com.